So I'm warning you that this triple deadline is coming on April 15th. I want you to think about it now. Think about budgeting for it now. And if you haven't been keeping up with paying your quarterly tax payments, you really want to get on top of that habit as a person who works for yourself and earns income as a self-employed person, because it keeps you out of tax trouble. And it also keeps cash available for you to contribute to things like your IRA. And that is the thing that people intend to fund, but run out of money for and never end up funding. So if I did nothing else with this calendar, that is the thing I want you to understand. Welcome to the Sunlight Podcast. In this show, we're talking about taxes, money, and careers for self-employed people who have a big vision for changing the world with their work. I'm your host, Hannah Cole, artist, tax pro, and the founder of Sunlight Tax. If you're a creative or soul-centered entrepreneur or wellness practitioner who wants to grow your business sustainably, manage your taxes, and build a stash of fuck you money so you can control your time and have a bigger impact with your work, you are in the right place. Hello, I am so happy to be back with you. Today, I want to talk about calendar stuff for when it comes to your taxes, tax deadlines, but also just some prompts about getting yourself ready to, for example, pay your quarterly taxes, because it's really important to understand that there are some tasks you'll need to have ready before you pay your quarterly taxes. You are not going to be able to make an accurate tax payment unless you have already calculated your profit for the quarter. So I want to talk to you about putting dates on your calendar to set yourself up for success throughout the year. And I have a really exciting tool that I have built, and that is free. And I'm going to tell you how to get it in this episode. All right, so let's get started. So I just want to tell you a little story. This is a sidebar before we jump into today's episode. I've been thinking a lot about community, about how, it's hard to be a person who works in the world of taxes and civics in a world that feels like it's losing its civics, right? In this country, a lot of legislatures have actually made it illegal to teach civics in public schools. And I feel like you can see that. You can see that around, right? People don't know the basics of how our government works and the sort of assumptions about the level of engagement that a standard citizen is supposed to have in a democracy. And it can be really a little bit demoralizing as somebody who does, democratic organizing when it feels like people don't realize that their engagement is actually really critical to the system working. But although that stuff is happening, and although social media undoubtedly is teaching us all to get enraged really quickly and feel very polarized, I think people want and crave the opposite. And I had two experiences this weekend that I just want to mention here today, because they reminded me how thirsty people are feeling for community and connection. So I'm just going to tell you a short little story before we jump into today's episode. Moves in near me. I always think, oh, I should go take them something and introduce myself, right? And a lot of the time, I just end up, it gets away from me. I don't do it within a couple of weeks of them moving in. And then I feel sort of guilty that I forgot or didn't do it. I get distracted and then it never happens. And I feel a little embarrassed. So a new neighbor moved in next door to me just this week. And I was, I had family in town because I just had my art exhibit just opened on Friday. And so I had family in town. It was a total circus, but I was like, it's only going to take 10 minutes. I should just, go take him some eggs from our chickens and just like say hello. So even though my family's like in the middle of cooking dinner, it was totally ridiculous time to do it. I was like, okay, I'm doing it. And so I like grabbed some eggs from our chickens and I like ran next door and I just knocked on the door, just made myself do it. And I knocked on the door. He took a little moment to open up, and then he opened up and he was like, oh my goodness, I'm so honored. I mean, he was so happy to have a neighbor come and say hi and say, welcome to the neighborhood. He was so happy. And this is the thing that is really hilarious about me like finally breaking the ice and doing that. So as I'm standing on his porch and we're having some chit chat, and it was totally delightful, my neighbor gets home from work and the neighbor sees us chatting on the porch. And I wave to the neighbor, and the neighbor walks over and introduces himself. And then another neighbor across the street saw three of us all gathered on the porch, and she came over. And then she ran back to her house and grabbed her husband and pulled him over. And then our other neighbor came out and joined. So here's the thing I think is funny about that. Everyone on the street felt the same way I did. Like everyone had this intention of being neighborly, of helping this person feel welcome, of like introducing the community. And yet nobody wanted to be the first one to start it, right? Everybody was waiting to be invited or waiting to have permission. And the hard part was getting started. So I realize that this may sound like virtue signaling. But this weekend, just the fact that I was like, all right, fuck it, I'm doing it. And I like went over and did it. It became this unbelievably heartwarming, delightful moment where all these neighbors were like just waiting for the moment to do it. And everybody came over. It just reminded me how much people are thirsty for community, thirsty for connection. It was wonderful. So the funny thing is, I have a follow-up coda to that story where like I was kind of riding on the high from that. And the very next morning, not even 24 hours later, probably 12 hours later, I was doing my normal morning walk, and I walked into this coffee shop, and I saw this woman who I've definitely introduced myself to before, but I had forgotten her name. And I felt a little embarrassed about that. And but I know that her kids go to the same school as mine, that we sort of overlap in a lot of ways in our community. On my way out of the coffee shop, probably thinking about this like eagerness for connection and community that I had been rewarded for the night before, I just like leaned over to her and made a little joke in passing on my way out. She had her laptop with her, and I totally assumed that she'd be like, haha, and then like put her head back down to her laptop and want to get back to work, right? I wasn't trying to interrupt her. But that's not at all what happened. She shut her laptop. She looked up, and her body language was just totally like, I want to talk. And I just found that so funny that like we just assume that people are busy. We don't want to disturb them. We don't want to do it. And people are dying to be asked. People are dying to be welcomed into conversation and community. So I just say this, if you're feeling the way that I feel sometimes, like we're losing the connections in our community, I just say to you, I hope that maybe you start a conversation today. Maybe there's, bring a flyer for something over to your neighbor, or say hello, introduce yourself. And also, I want to say, as somebody in my mid 40s, let's normalize forgetting names. Like, I think it's a good strategy to just say your name again to somebody. I do it all the time. I just say, I'm Hannah. Can you help me again with your name? Or I'm Hannah, by the way, even though I know I've introduced myself, because I forget people's names. I meet so many people and I'm not good at it. And you know what? I'm just a human. I think that's a thing that often stops me from introducing myself. And I have decided I'm just going to take the hit and like be like, yeah, you know what? I'm going to admit it. I've forgotten your name, but I want to talk to you. So there's my little community civics moment. Let's talk about the calendar. Okay. So the reason that I want to talk about the calendar today is that a lot of times when I'm thinking about how to teach people to have good bookkeeping practices, good tax paying practices, to stay on top of things that keep coming up throughout the year, like quarterly tax deadlines, for example, a lot of times I wish I could teach people in a sort of ongoing calendar focused way where it's like, oh, okay, so today's January 1st. Today's the day you do XYZ. Oh, today's January 20th. This is the time that you need to do blah, 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 right? So I actually did it. I actually decided I would build a little downloadable calendar that I could share with people that actually had little notes from me throughout the whole year. So basically that would list, your basic tax deadlines. So the corporate tax deadline, the personal income tax deadline, the quarterly tax payment deadlines, the IRA contribution deadline, 401k deadline, tax planning deadlines, things like that. So get them all on the calendar, but also have little prompts in there like, this is a good time to get started on the bookkeeping in advance of this quarterly tax deadline. This is the time that most accountants have recovered, had their 2 weeks of vacation after the horrifying tax deadline, and they're feeling pretty chill and relaxed. And if you reach out to your accountant at this time, they'll usually answer you pretty quickly, and you can usually get really good service, which is not true about reaching out to an accountant at fully 1/3 of the year, if not more. So just little hints about like this timing is really good, throughout, sprinkled across an annual calendar with annual repeated reminders that a person can just download and just basically have those notes from me. So guess what? I made it. It exists. If I'm honest, I'm still tweaking it a little bit as I record this podcast, but by the time this podcast drops, it will be completely finished. And so I just want you to know that I have created this calendar for you, and I am offering it as a free bonus for anyone who shows up live to the masterclass that I'm offering. If you're listening to this the day it drops, the masterclass is tomorrow, Wednesday, November 15th. I am offering a free class called Make Your Taxes Easier and Stash an Extra $130,000 in Your Savings. It is a masterclass that I have hosted many times, tweaked, and I improve it. I'm talking about why people's taxes are often so fraught and stressful, even when you feel like you've organized your books well, why there's all this recalculating. And I talk about my system for eliminating or reducing recalculating. I'm talking about the math in this class, about how retirement is possible and what kind of money it saves you when you use tax-advantaged accounts and when you get into the habit of contributing to them every single year. So this masterclass is super valuable. You're going to get a lot out of it. It's totally free, but you do have to register, and you can do that at go.sunlighttax.com/free. So I'm really excited for that masterclass, and I've decided that this calendar, this downloadable calendar with dates on it, tax deadline reminders, but also bookkeeping reminders, setup reminders, reaching out to your accountant reminders. These are all on that calendar. So it's totally free, but it is only going to be available to people who register for my masterclass that's happening tomorrow, Wednesday the 15th, and also who show up to it. So you have to actually be there. Your butt has to be in the seat watching the webinar in order to get this bonus. Basically, we'll do a survey of everyone who's on the class at the end, and that will be the list of people that we send the calendar download link to. So you can get this calendar. Once again, the first step is to register for this class at go.sunlighttax.com/free. It's totally free to register for the class, to come to the class, and the calendar is free. You don't have to buy anything from me. You'll learn a little bit about my program, Money Bootcamp, and inside Money Bootcamp, there will be eventually a more robust version of this calendar that will have video guides from me. That will be a paid product eventually. But for now, I just have the light version, which is for free. All right, so let's review some of the stuff that is on this calendar. And of course, if you want to get it yourself, you just register for that class, and then you show up live at noon East Coast time on Wednesday, November 15th. All right. So again, you can register go.sunlighttax.com/free. All right. So what do you want to put on your calendar? First of all, I really recommend setting up a calendar for yourself that has recurring tax deadlines on it and has reminders to yourself on it so that you get yourself organized in time. Okay. So the things that I think are really important to have on your calendar are, first of all, the tax deadlines. April 15th is hard to forget. Most of us know that one, but it's also important to remind yourself that April 15th is a triple deadline. It's a deadline to submit your tax return. It's not just the deadline to pay your taxes. And this is a friendly reminder that you cannot extend the payment deadline. A lot of people make a mistake and think that if you file a tax extension, that it extends your time to pay your taxes. And that is not true. The tax payment deadline is April 15th, and it is not extendable. The thing that you get when you file for a tax extension is you get an extension of time to file your paperwork for the tax return, but you are still under the law required to make your full tax payment. So obviously we know that it's going to be an estimate because if you haven't done your taxes yet, you don't know the exact number. The point of filing a tax return, the paperwork, is actually understanding and reconciling your tax paid in the prior year versus the actual tax you owe. So it's the reconciliation process between those two items. But the tax payment is always due on April 15th and there are no extensions. So understanding that is very important. It's also important to understand that April 15th is also the deadline for two other big chunks of money. And this is really, really key for you to get in your head early on. So we're talking now in November. I like for people to be thinking about this now, because now you have a couple months to be setting aside and budgeting. But if you don't think of this until April 1st, you're out of time and you are not going to come up with, a couple thousand extra dollars. So the two other deadlines that happen on April 15th are your first estimated quarterly payment is due. Okay. So that's for the current year, right? Your tax payment is for the prior year. You have to settle up any outstanding balance of taxes that you owed from last year. But your first estimated quarterly tax payment is a tax payment for this current year, right? So April 15th, you've had 4 months through the year. You're paying your taxes through the end of March by April 15th. In addition to that is the most important deadline, which is the deadline to contribute money to your IRA. Now, your IRA, it is retroactive and it's wonderful. So you can take up until April 15th to contribute money to your IRA that will count for the prior tax year. In other words, it will give you potentially, if it's a traditional IRA, a tax benefit on that tax return from the prior year. It's really great. But what happens is if you're behind in your tax system, if you're not organized and you're not paying quarterly taxes regularly, so you get behind in your tax payments, what happens to people on April 15th, and I say this because I have seen it over and I built my whole program, Money Bootcamp, to help teach people how to not be in this situation, how to get out of it and how to stay out of it. What I see happen to people is that you intend to fund your IRA. You want to fund your IRA, but that tax deadline comes and you're behind on the money and the bill is bigger than you thought it was because you didn't realize self-employment tax was such a big part of it. Plus, you owe taxes for the first quarter of the current year. And what happens is you run out of money. You just don't have any money left over after those two bills in order to contribute to your IRA. This sucks. It is such a bad scenario. And man, I've seen the nth degree worst possible versions of it. So I'm warning you that this triple deadline is coming on April 15th. I want you to think about it now. Think about budgeting for it now. And if you haven't been keeping up with paying your quarterly tax payments, you really want to get on top of that habit as a person who works for yourself and earns income as a self-employed person, because it keeps you out of tax trouble. And it also keeps cash available for you to contribute to things like your IRA. And that is the thing that people intend to fund, but run out of money for and never end up funding. So if I did nothing else with this calendar, that is the thing I want you to understand. Okay. But I've also put other things on this calendar and what they are. And right now you can do this yourself, or you can come to my class tomorrow and you can get this free calendar for yourself, for your own use. And I'm so excited about it. But what I want you to put in your calendar now are the 4 quarterly tax payment deadlines. Obviously, April 15th is the biggie, and that's the triple deadline. So last year's tax is due. This year's first estimated quarterly tax payment is due, plus it's the contribution deadline for your IRA. So that's a big one, April 15th. Set the alarm to recur annually so that it's always there every April 15th. And then you want to put the other quarterly tax deadlines on there. So those are June 15th, September 15th, and January 15th. One more bonus deadline I want you to put on that is the deadline to issue your 1099s. Contractors to do things for your business. So if you're an artist and you hired a photographer to photograph your work, if you hired a graphic designer, a social media manager, a VA, a virtual assistant, anybody that you hired on a contract basis, so a non-employee, you owe them a 1099. You must file that paperwork by January 31st. If you don't, you'll incur penalties daily until the day you actually send out the 1099s. There is no getting around this rule. And I will warn you that the penalties for it, the trend at the IRS is to make these penalties for non-issuing 1099s stiffer and stiffer and stiffer, because this is how they crack down on unreported cash income. So believe me, it is a major goal of the IRS to make sure that you're issuing your 1099s as required by law. So do not assume that if you managed somehow to not do it last year, that it's okay to not do it this year. The IRS is going to catch up with you, and the penalties are going to be worse than you think, and they're getting worse every year. So January 31st is the date by which you need to have issued all your contractors 1099s. So you want to make sure that that date is on your calendar. And another calendar date that I love is January 1st. Don't worry, we know you may be hungover or sleeping in after staying up late on New Year's Eve, but the one and only very quick thing I want you to put on your calendar and do every January 1st is note your odometer. The reason for that is because business mileage is a wonderful deduction, a very robust and juicy deduction for you, but you are required to state on your tax return every year what your total mileage was. This is the thing a lot of people miss, and it's really actually easy to capture it if you just have a once a year habit of marking your odometer on the 1st of January. So if you do that, you have a starting mileage for this year, but you also have ending mileage for last year. So see how you only have to do it once a year and it gives you the total for every year. Obviously, if you sell your car, you're going to have to mark the mileage when you sell it, and you have to mark the new mileage. So there's that additional piece if you get a new car. But if you're using the same car, then just a January 1st habit is going to get you covered for that total mileage number that needs to go in your tax return. Okay, so I want you to know that this calendar has all kinds of other tips like this, documentation tips. It has a little bit of color coding. So tax payment deadlines are coded in one color. Reaching out to your accountant deadlines or suggestions are coded in another color. And then moments where you need to do something like document something like your odometer or get your bookkeeping up to date in order to know what your profit was and make a calculation for your quarterly tax payment, those are coded in another color. And there are descriptions in the description box from me about why those deadlines exist, what they're about, what the rules are. So it's really helpful. It's not going to take up a ton of your space. It will integrate right into your Google Calendar, and you can turn it on and off. If you know Google Calendars, you can check it on, check it off. It's not taking up huge amounts of space on your calendar. It's just there as gentle nudges to make sure that you never miss a tax deadline. So once again, I am just embarking on a launch for my program, Money Bootcamp, and I am kicking that off with a free class to teach a bunch of the principles that I go into much greater depth inside my program, which is built to set you up with really easy bookkeeping and paying your quarterly taxes on time and just getting on top of all the tax advantaged things that you can as a self-employed person to save the maximum amount of money for yourself. That class is free and it starts tomorrow at noon East Coast time. And it's called Make Taxes Easier and Stash an Extra $130K in Your Savings. And you can register at go.sunlighttax.com. And if you show up live to that class, if you mark your calendar and you show up, we'll be taking attendance at the end of the class, and everyone who stayed through the class is going to get my free downloadable tax nudge calendar. And I'm so excited about it. I plan to add improvements to it, and eventually there will be videos that tie into it as well. So get it while it's hot. I probably will end up charging for this eventually, but you can get it free if you join the class tomorrow. All right. I hope this calendar nudge has been helpful for you. Whether or not you join the class tomorrow, I do want you to put those dates I mentioned today on your calendar, because those are the very basic bare bones ones. But there's a bunch more for your tax advantage accounts, for tax planning, lots of other stuff. So hopefully I see you in class tomorrow, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Take care. Bye. Thank you for listening. If you like the show, be sure to subscribe, leave a review. It really helps, and share it with a friend. I'm so grateful. This podcast is for education and entertainment only. Nothing in this episode should be taken as individual tax or financial advice. You can find all the tools, books, and links we reference at sunlighttax.com/podcast.